Welcome back to The Sad Moms. If you've been here before, you know this is a space where we talk honestly about life after loss, specifically the loss of a child. But today's episode is part of a new segment we're calling Grief Gossip, where we take a step back and look at grief in a broader way. These episodes aren't just about child loss, but about how grief weaves itself into different parts of life. Since November is Children's Grief Awareness Month, we'll be talking about childhood grief and how those of us with living children can support them through their grief. I've invited Lauren Schneider to join me on this episode. Lauren has been working in children's grief for over 35 years. She specifically has worked as the clinical director at Our House Grief Support Center, which is an organization that my family holds close to our hearts, as this is where our two girls have received their grief support the past 2 years. If you are a parent, caregiver, or loved one who is looking to support a child or teen navigating grief, please join us in this important conversation. Welcome back, everyone. So today we're joined by Lauren Schneider. And to me, you're an expert in grief, but why don't you share a little bit about your background and your journey in this grief world?
Okay, well, I'm real happy to be talking to you. We always say that the people that we serve are the experts in their grief, and I'm more like a companion to them. But I have been working with grievers. Now it's something like 35 years. So I've heard basically every story that could possibly happen, I think. But if you want my origin story, what you're going way back actually to before I was born. I was born into a family that had a lot of grief. I was raised by a mom who experienced the death very early of her mother during the Holocaust. And when you have an early childhood loss like that, there's a big part of you that remains a grieving child. And as a firstborn child myself, then I took on the role of being a great comfort to her, as did my sister. And that kind of morphed into being a listener and a caregiver. And I remember being inspired by the Peanuts cartoon, the Lucy character, and wanting to be a therapist at a really young age. And I went to graduate school and started studying intergenerational trauma related to Holocaust survivors. Because back then, most of the research was done with that population. And then later it started being applied to other populations who were experiencing genocide. And I entered the field, wow, like somewhere around 35 years ago, started working with grieving children very early.
Wow. So how have you seen the landscape of childhood grief change over your 35 years working in this field?
It's changed in very, very good ways. I think the most salient ways that it's changed have been that rather than the narrow focus on just the child that we had at first, it's brought into looking at the whole family and at the well-being of the caregivers. So in fact, like in the setting where you and your family came at our house in Los Angeles and now in New York, we redesigned our entire program to include the caregivers in the support that we were offering to the family in a much more holistic, inclusive way. Because of what the research was showing, all the research showed that of all the things that could be done that would contribute to a healthy outcome in the grieving process for children, the thing that helped the most was how well their caregivers would adjust to life without their person who died.
So how well the parents are doing or the caregivers are doing.
So that need to have programs that would provide not just services for children, like drop-off programs, but ones where the parents would be required or caregiver be required to also be in programs. So that, and also to teach coping strategies. So somewhere about maybe 12 years ago, 15 years ago, we started borrowing from cognitive behavioral therapy in particular where we would find these coping skills, ones that your girls have learned, specific like coping strategies that we would teach the kids in group or at camp that they could use to comfort themselves in the absence of a caregiver, in bed at night, even at school, to help them learn how to self-soothe. So that became an integral part of the work that we do.
And tell us a little bit about Our House. Not everyone's in LA, but Our House is a
Okay.
grief support center that myself and my family, my husband and daughters, have been coming to now for 2 years. I don't know where we would be without Our House and the support that we've received in this community. It's been life-changing for me, at least. So tell us a little bit about the program and your involvement.
Well, I ran the kids program at Our House for 23 years.
Wow.
And so I saw it grow from just a tiny little mom and pop organization to now we're bi-coastal. We're the only agency operating in 2 states in the United States, which is quite, something we're extremely proud of. But there are places like Our House, nonprofits. We're non-sectarian, where families can come, with either free or on a generous sliding scale to get grief support services, not therapy, because grief is not a mental illness, but an opportunity to meet other people their own age who are going through the same thing, and reducing like that isolation that grievers experience so they don't feel like they're the only ones that are going through that. And we do that, year pretty much, well, through the academic year in the Family Support Program, which is the name of the program that we have for children and their caregivers. And then we also at Our House, which is quite unique compared to other grief support centers, have a separate adult program. So that would be for any adult basically could find a group here at either Our House where they could get support for the death that they experienced regardless of whether they have children or not. And that is a group where they can talk about what they experienced and not at all about what's happening with their kids.
Mm-hmm. And Our House is for kids who are experiencing any type of grief, loss of parent, loss of sibling, or
it's someone significant because it is a big commitment to
Yeah.
come every other week for a whole academic year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mainly adult and sibling bereaved children who come. And then we've also been providing Camp Erin since 2009, which is an amazing thing. I started that camp here, not Camp Erin, but Camp Erin for Our House in 2009. But that's a national organization that the Aluna Foundation is the umbrella organization for. They're all over the country as well.
Yeah, Camp Erin is a very life-changing experience as well. So we've really enjoyed going to that too. It's good to know that's a national program. So that's available in multiple different states.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, there's probably about 40 locations across the United States. I think that's where we first met.
Yeah, it is. And then can you share a little bit about the backstory of Camp Erin and how it started?
So camp was founded by a former Major League ball player named Jamie Moyer and his wife at the time, Karen Moyer. They met a girl named Erin through the Make-A-Wish Foundation and were inspired by her battle with leukemia and her concern for how her siblings would cope when and if she died from her disease, which she did at age 15. And they started the camp after Erin died. And at first, it was just going to be offered in cities where there was a major league ball team, but then it branched out and they would partner with places like Our House. So it was offered in cities where there was a freestanding bereavement center or maybe through a hospice program. And we started doing it in 2009, 1 camp a year. Then we went to 2 camps a year. And it was a sleepaway camp initially, but during COVID, we started just doing day camps because it was too hard to house kids during the pandemic. And next year we hope to go back to sleepaway camp because it's quite fun.
The girls have been asking, they're like, when is it going to be sleepaway camp
It's
again?
quite fun. Well, your oldest is almost ready to be a volunteer. Before you know it, she could be a volunteer.
She does talk to me about that.
She can't wait.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool part is a lot of your volunteers can be kids who have gone through your program.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So they come back. I think it's a lifelong support system for them.
Yeah.
They've really made some great connections.
They do. And they get, after they've been with us a couple years, which is like how your kids have been, they start saying, when can I be a volunteer,
Yeah, it's something to look forward to for them, to experience our house and Camp Erin in a different way.
Yeah,
which is
the
cool.
good thing about camp is half the programming is definitely grief support. It's not just knowing that other kids had a death in their family, but they really do process their grief the way they do in our groups. But the other half is just play, just outdoor fun. We have a dance, we have swimming at sleepaway camp, we have the rock wall, they just get a chance to have fun and take a break from the sadness at home, the heaviness.
I think some of the feedback the girls have given me is like that it's just nice to be with kids who get it.
Yeah.
It's all kids. They can just be themselves and be free and have fun, and the kids around them are just kids who understand grief.
Yeah. But I had one of your daughters this year, and they did some hard work in her cabin. They really did some work in the grief activities, and so it is definitely grief camp, not like day camp.
Yeah. But it's good that you integrate the fun stuff with the serious stuff too.
Yeah.
What are some common misconceptions that adults tend to have about how children grieve?
Well, because they look different on the outside than adults. They don't look like they're grieving in classic ways, and they don't have the attention span to sustain that sad, outward demeanor, how adults look, especially during that first year. People just assume that they weren't grieving. And then as the field of psychology developed, which was around the time of World War II, the academic field began to study grieving children and began to do research and so forth that did show that kids obviously were grieving, but they just were doing it in different ways. Some of the reasons why they don't show it on the outside are, I would say, number one, they don't want to upset the other members of their family. So especially during the first year when the adults are grieving like adults. They look like they're grieving. The kids are trying really hard not to upset their grown-ups or their siblings. The siblings aren't even talking about it in a lot of the families. So they're just trying to put up a brave front, Maybe they're crying when they're alone or in the shower, if they even get some alone time. A lot of them don't have bedrooms where they are alone, so they don't have the privacy to grieve. So they're grieving on the inside, and then definitely at school, they're definitely not going to show it at school because what happens, you get teased, you get left out, you don't get picked for the team at recess to play games. So they're trying to fit in, not look different, because the worst thing happens, you get left out or even bullied, and that happens all the time to our kids.
I think the school has been really difficult for the girls. It's been so difficult. I get a lot of feedback about that. And it's like what you were saying, the people at school, like the counselors and administrators are like, oh, they look fine. They're doing great. Mm-hmm. But they come and they tell me, it's hard at school. I have to pretend. I can't tell anyone. It has to be a secret. So they feel a lot of stress, even though it doesn't look that way.
Yeah. They do look like everybody else. They don't want to be othered. They don't want to be those kids whose sister died or whose brother or whose mommy died, So, and that goes on in high school too, not just in elementary school. It's even worse in high school because the forms of bullying become more dangerous.
Mm-hmm. What are some signs that a grieving child might be struggling if they're not talking about it directly?
Well, it depends on the age of the child. So what we know from elementary school aged kids is they might leave the room if the subject comes up. So like a parent might say something very innocuous like, oh, that was your dad's favorite movie. Let's watch that together. You guys have never seen it. And one child might just get up and leave the room, right? Because just mentioning that person who died, what it does is it activates a reaction that's painful for them on the inside. So they don't even want to be around the mentioning of that person. They might not want to leave the house. So we've had kids who came to us at our house that were not going to school. They're grown-ups, no matter all their best parenting efforts, could not get them out of the house in the morning. They'd be dragging them out to the car in their pajamas and could not get their kids to school. They were terrified to leave the house because they were afraid if they were separated from their caregiver, their grown up during the day, somebody else might die. So they were trying to stay in close proximity to alleviate that anxiety. So severe anxiety, depression, in addition to grief. So grief and depression are two different things. So depression, meaning not wanting to play, not wanting to get together with friends, participate in sports or after school activities, just wanting to be in their room and listen to music or go to sleep, sleeping more, sleeping less. So regression to like earlier stages of development.
And is it about like in middle school and high school, does anything significant change?
In its worst forms, you have kids that have academic problems, who might develop substance abuse problems in high school, health problems even, because a lot of kids starting in elementary school might somaticize their grief, right? So like have stomach aches, go to the nurse's office. I have a stomach ache, I have a headache, but it's really their grief, but they don't know how to say, I'm really missing my mom today, it's awful at home without her. So they say, I have a stomach ache. And they do have an actual stomach ache. It's not that they don't, but they don't know how to verbalize that.
Yeah. I mean, as an adult, I've noticed how the somatic experience of grief, like your body just sometimes can't move and you don't know why and you don't know what's going on. So as an adult, it's scary and confusing. So I can
or
only
your
imagine.
heart is racing, that, or you're just clenching your hands, and your shoulders and stuff. And then later those parts ache,
Yeah.
right? Your jaws, things like that.
Have you ever worked with any children with developmental disabilities surrounding grief?
Autism spectrum disorder. We've tried to make accommodations so we can have children in the program that are on that spectrum. And because our group leaders at our house are not clinicians, they're volunteers, they're not trained to work with kids that have special needs. But some kids that are higher functioning can very effectively go to volunteer-led programs like our house. With kids with disabilities, if they're nonverbal, there might be things that would arise like, self-harm, or they might, in a positive way, act out their grief through play or through art instead of being able to verbalize it.
What does the current research tell us about how children process grief and loss?
How they process it?
Mm-hmm.
There's not great research,
Okay.
I'm sorry to say, on how kids are processing it. I think that, again, it varies depending on the developmental stage. So when you say process, are you saying how they understand death?
Yeah, maybe how they understand it, how they go through it.
Okay, so kids under age 5, let's say, their brains are not developed enough to understand the basic death-related concepts. So they don't understand, first of all, that the body stops functioning when a person dies. So they literally just picture their person somewhere else, walking around, playing golf or playing soccer, whatever it is that person who died used to do when they were alive, just that they're doing it somewhere else. So that's called non-functionality. They don't get that death is permanent and irreversible. So oh, my daddy died, but he'll be home in time for my birthday.
Okay.
So that, but then what happens is our bereaved children, they do start to understand death much sooner than their non-bereaved peers. So while they say that kids don't understand the finality of death till around age 7, our kids might around 5 because of their life experience. Like at 4, the person's not home for their birthday, but by 5, if their sister's not there for their birthday, then they might get, oh, I guess they were right. I'll never see my sister alive again. So it kicks in younger for the bereaved kids than non-bereaved kids. Then what happens, like in grade school, they're beginning to get that death is permanent, but the things they don't quite get is that death happens to everyone, that it can happen at any time, so it's unpredictable. They don't understand causality totally. That's why they need to be told the truth. So when people say, oh, well, we got a call yesterday that grandma's not going to be at your birthday because she's going on a trip around the world and we don't know when she's coming back. Or grandma's just sleeping, so we're not going to see her for a long, long time. That's totally confusing, and it leads to all kinds of other problems. And especially because kids tend to overhear things, they might be told these confusing half-truths or just outright lies, but then hear other people talking, hear mom talking to her sister on the phone, and then they don't trust grown-ups after that. And if you realize that you're not being told the truth by the people you're supposed to trust the most, Shani, that totally blows your ability to form intimate partner relationships as adults. So we always tell people, like at our house, we always used to say, you have to tell the kids the truth or you can't bring the kids to the program. And they are old enough to be told the truth. So that's one
do
of
you
the
think
myths.
even at a very young age, you think it's okay?
Yeah. And what we do is we titrate how we tell them the truth. So you tell them a little bit, and then you say, do you have any questions about what mommy just said? And if they ask another question about it, that means they're old enough to hear the answer. If they're like, nope, can I go out and play now? That means they have as much as they're able to process. All right.
Okay.
Then, like, just a word about teens. Teenagers, like, they think that they should have the same rights as adults, right? But their brains are still developing. So they don't process grief the way adults. They still have very immature ways of processing grief. And we see that especially in how they cope with it. They can cope with it in ways that can be extremely dangerous, right? Some of those coping skills. And they're also very likely to engage in the same kind of magical thinking as our toddlers, which means they're likely to be blaming themselves for the death the way the little kids do.
So is that common with little kids that they blame themselves? I don't think I knew that.
Especially the toddlers do.
So like
they always
under
do.
5?
Like I was a bad girl this morning. I spilled my milk, and that's why my mommy died.
Okay.
When mommy had a car accident and died while she was at school.
Yeah.
Like that, and of course adults do a little bit of would've, could've, should've's. Anyways, we all do that. Like if I had taken her to the doctor sooner, they would have caught the cancer sooner. That's normal to do would've, could've, should've's. But with toddlers and teens, it's due to magical thinking, which is developmentally appropriate in those two age groups.
So how does grief change throughout the developmental stages with kids? Let's say, you have a parent die at the age of 5. I guess something I've read is that children continue to re-experience the grief as they get older.
Exactly. They do. And that's why we say there's no end point for grief. There's no expiration date. Like every time you enter a different developmental stage. So like the kids that are in our teen groups here, when they get to go to college, they will re-experience it because they're leaving for college, picking schools without their parent who died when they were in middle school, or they're getting ready to get married, but they're not going to have their dad to walk them down the aisle, things like that. And they're becoming a parent, and they don't have their mom to talk to about what her pregnancy was like. So all these milestones, they keep reworking it.
Okay.
Yeah. And that goes on for the entire lifespan. What are you saying
Oh,
about?
I guess it's just a lot. I guess I think about my girls because they're young. And the littlest one, she was almost 5 when Rylan died. So I do see some of what, you're talking about. And she has experienced it in different ways. And then my older daughter, Neva, she also is experiencing it in different ways. Like she'll go through phases where she doesn't want to talk about it at all. And then she really wants to talk about it every single day. And it's really like a roller coaster. So I'm thinking about, as a parent, how can we support them through this? It's hard. It's
But
really
that's a
hard.
good sign now that she's asking you questions,
Okay.
because what that tells me is she sees that you're doing better, that
Okay.
you're strong enough now for her to come to you, Ishani, and ask you those questions. So that's one of the things that parents can do for their kids that's so important, is answer those questions. And they will repeat the questions. Neva is now, her brain is in a slightly different stage of cognitive development. So she's reprocessing, with that higher level of cognitive ability than she did 2.5 years ago when Rylan died.
Yeah. And I think as a parent, for me as a parent, I just constantly think I'm failing. I think that's just a constant thing. Like, are we ever doing enough for them? Is it, I don't know. I constantly feel like I'm not doing enough or they're going to hate me for how I dealt with this. You
They're
know what I
always
mean?
mad at you when you're
Yeah.
a mom, whether you have a child who dies or not. They're always going to be mad. I mean, my kids are in their 40s and they're always mad at me for something.
It's true.
But one thing that's really a good way to check how your kids are doing is by how they're doing at school.
Okay.
They have to let their hair down somewhere, and if they can, be bad at home, that's okay, because that means they feel safe enough to be at home if they're doing well at school. When we need to be worried about kids is if they're they're having tantrums at home, not listening and stuff, but they're doing it at school too. The teachers are saying, oh my gosh, she's so great. She's such a good citizen. Her homework is exceptional.
Yeah.
She's so good with her peers.
Yeah. I get that a lot. It's like, oh, seems like she's doing great. And I'm like, well,
They have to do better than that. I can give you some suggestions for your listeners on what to expect from teachers, but she seems like she's doing great. There's more measures than that.
what can be done at schools to support grieving kids?
I mean, teachers need to understand there's no such thing as a grief card. That's what I always say when I do teachings at schools. There is no such thing as a grief card. That once a grieving child, you're always a grieving child.
When you say grief card, you mean like pulling the grief card?
Yeah, like,
okay.
"Oh, I'm sorry I forgot my homework because I was really missing my dad last night." That is not, they're not making that up. You're always going to be a grieving child, and there's no expiration date. So you get to 9th grade and your dad died when you were in 6th grade, you're still going to have some really bad days. Right? Now there's better education for teachers on grief than when I first entered the field. The New York Life started this Grief Sensitive Schools initiative, and they send people into the schools to do education for teachers, which has been really helpful, I hope. But teachers need to know that kids need to be allowed to call home if they are feeling anxious. They need to do that. They should have signals with very young children if they need to be excused to go to the nurse's office or the whoever, the dean of school, head of school, whatever it's called at that school, to take a break if they need a break, and things like that. I think the middle schoolers just like to go to the bathroom for a minute and splash water on their face, and do some of their breathing techniques. And peers need to have a lesson on how to support a grieving friend. These are all things that local grief support centers can do to help schools understand how to deal with and be helpful if a child at a school has recently had a parent or sibling die.
Are there any particular interventions or models of grief support for children that are backed by research or clinical evidence?
There is evidence that being in peer support groups are helpful. In particular, they do reduce the isolation that grieving children experience during the day at school. Because they don't want to identify themselves as a grieving child because they need to blend in. They might feel that they're the only one that happened to at their school, which is a really horrible feeling. It feels very unfair. So finding a peer support group, a lot of the schools offer, they call it a grief group, but they throw kids in there whose parents got divorced or experienced some other loss like incarceration. And it's not the same thing as death. Death is permanent. Those other things are not permanent. And so I am not a proponent of those kinds of school-based grief groups. And then a lot of those counselors, they don't have the training to do a grief group.
I was just going to bring that up. I work in children's mental health as well. And I myself, I don't think received the proper training in grief. And I think a lot of the other school-based professionals that I work with, we haven't been trained properly in grief and how to respond to children who are grieving or grief crisis.
No, and that's true of new graduates too. You graduated much more recently than me, but even the ones just graduating, maybe they had a lecture, maybe one lecture on children's grief. Some maybe took an elective on grief, but that was adult grief and kids in one elective. But that's about the most, is one elective. So most people have no idea, but let's go back to your question.
The interventions or models of grief support, yeah.
So peer groups, we talked about, it reduces the isolation. They also get their own grief reactions normalized. So they might think that they're grieving wrong. They're not getting their feelings validated at home, like, that they get the sense that they're grieving wrong, like, oh, don't yell, don't get mad. Maybe they're getting their feelings squelched at home if they don't have a supportive home environment. But then they get to group and they see that anger is a normal thing. It's a natural grief response as long as they're not hurting themselves or someone else. So in a group, they hear other people have the same reaction, and the activities that they're doing reinforce that what they're feeling is natural and normal for people their own age. So that's really powerful. They learn coping skills and do activities that help them with holding on to their important memories. So a big fear, probably especially for your younger daughter, is that she'll forget her brother, which now she doesn't have to worry about because she's had good support from you and your husband, and 2 years in our program. Everything is really firmly rooted in her memories. She has her box full of projects. So all of that is going to ensure that she holds on to her memories.
And those are activities that help them feel connected to their person who died.
Help them retain their memories.
Okay.
So projects about, this is what we did here, or they can do memory books at home for people that don't have a grief center to go to. Memory books, memory boxes. You can buy those online, memory books. We have them on our website. Anything that will help them retain their memories, like, things they like to do with their person who died. Last birthday they spent together. Last Christmas they spent together.
And do they continue to add to those books throughout the years, like at home? Like if they don't have a grief support center to go to, is that something they refer back to?
It's hard to add to them, but in a box, like to put their keepsakes in. If grandma died, like things that they got from grandma, they can put into their box. Photos, anything that they want that will help them remember their person. So doing memory books, memory boxes is a really good activity that you can do either in a peer support group or a family member can do that with the child. If the caregiver isn't up to the task, that's something helpful that another, like an auntie, could do.
Okay.
And then we mentioned grief camps. There are other grief camps besides Camp Erin, but those do similar things like reducing the isolation and the normalizing piece, but also the fun, that break, a chance to just be a kid, not just be a grieving child, but just be a kid too, So that's important. So those things are helpful for children. They definitely are helpful.
Mm-hmm. And what do grieving kids need most from the adults in their lives?
Well, there have been a lot of studies about that.
Okay.
So, caregiver warmth is very important. Modeling, so a caregiver that can model grief. So, when I say that, modeling grief, like if they catch you grieving, if they go, "Are you crying, mommy?" Don't say, "Oh, no, I'm not crying." Like that, which we see people doing all the time. You say, "Oh, yeah, I am, because I was just thinking about something that your brother said to me, or I was just really missing your brother right now." I'm sure that happens to you sometimes, but I'm ready to listen to what you were saying. Can you please say it again? So own it,
Don't hide your grief.
don't hide it
basically.
from
Okay.
them, because they're sharp. Even the really little ones, they know, because they're very attuned to how their caregivers are doing. So don't try and hide it from them. Model. So if you're trying to get your kid into a grief group, join a grief group yourself. Trying to get them into therapy. Kids should not be thrown into therapy alone. The parent needs to participate too. Who cares if your kid has a good relationship with a therapist? That's not going to help you at home.
Mm-hmm.
The parent needs to participate in the therapy. I'm sorry, that's a strong belief of mine. So model that by participating and setting limits. You've heard me say this before. So when a person dies in a family, it feels the world becomes a very unsafe place, very chaotic. This very unpredictable thing has happened. I'm sure for your listeners and for your girls, they maintained hope till the very last second that Rylan was going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true for all the kids I've ever met. They never, ever thought it was going to happen until it really happened. So when it happens, then the world just feels very scary and unpredictable. So it's really as important for the parents then to make the rest of their life after that feel safe and predictable by providing very strong, safe, consistent, gently, lovingly enforced boundaries. Regular bedtime. People say, "Oh, just let her stay up. She's grieving. It's okay." That's actually the worst thing to do,
Okay.
right? So regular bedtimes, just a sense that there is still some predictability in life is going to go a lot further than that. And then offer positive reinforcement for the behaviors that you want to see more of rather than negative reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, "I'm going to take your computer away and if you don't go do your homework." The opposite. So if you go do your homework now, then you'll be able to watch 2 shows tonight instead of just 1 show. So reward the behaviors you want to see more of. So that kind of parenting goes a long way.
Okay. Something that has come up a lot is guilt in our home. Like, we have a lot of guilt as parents, but I didn't realize how much guilt that kids carry too. Can you speak a little more to that?
Tell me an example of what you're hearing.
Well, I think what Neva will always tell me is she says I didn't get to say goodbye to him because everything happened very suddenly. So she left for the morning. She's on a gymnastics team, so she had to go to her, daily practice. And it was over the holidays, so we were all home. So she left in the morning. She said bye to him, and it happened while she was at her practice. Everything happened just so fast, and she just always tells me, like, I didn't get to say goodbye to him. You're lucky you got to say goodbye to him. And I said, tell her you didn't want to say goodbye to him like that. It wasn't, it was not a good goodbye.
But she's telling you she wishes
She tells me she wishes, or she feels like guilty that she wasn't there, that she was somewhere else, she should have been home. So that comes up a lot.
So she feels guilty she went to gymnastics instead of being home that day. Yeah, and it's regret. Regret and guilt are very similar. So guilt is when you do something wrong, you feel guilty about it. So she feels guilty for going to gymnastics, but she regrets not saying goodbye to him.
Yes, correct.
So there's a lot of types of guilt, and a lot of the children feel survivor guilt, that she's alive and Ryland's not. So there's that. They all have regrets. So one thing that we do in group when they say stuff like that, or in therapy, we'll say, well, what is it? How would it have been for you if you had said goodbye? What would you have liked to have told him? So you can say, let's pretend that you were there that day. What would you have wanted to say to him? And she would say, well, I would tell him I love him and I'll never forget him. And you could say to her, you know what? Your brother knew that. He knew that you loved him. Think of all the time you did spend with him, that you did stay by him. So anything that she would want to tell him, you could definitely say he knew. I'm sure that your girls, just like your listeners' kids, express their love in so many different ways. And that's usually all that they wish that they could have said was, I love you, or I'll never forget you. Like at Camp Erin, we do a luminary ceremony at sleepaway camp up at the pool. And so I've heard that's a chance for them to say goodbye. And so I've heard all the things that they wish they could have said. And those are probably the two most common. So there's that, A lot of the guilt, though, that like I heard this summer at camp was, it's my fault he died. Well, what do you tell us about that? Well, I should have, I should have taken him I should have told the doctor, or I should have done this, like stuff that they absolutely could not have done,
Yeah.
So that's illogical thinking. So with younger kids, like especially the elementary and the preschoolers, they do this illogical thinking. Or even older kids sometimes, they think that there's something they could have done that would have prevented the death that is completely out of their control. Even the doctors couldn't do anything to save your brother. So, last time I checked, you've never been to medical school. And wait, let me look and see here. I don't see a medical license on your wall in your room. So you're not even a doctor? How do you think you could have saved your brother? Yeah. So that's what we do with them in group. Okay. Like we challenge the illogical thinking. So we train our group leaders to do that. That's the hardest thing that we have to work on, is guilt due to illogical thinking. Okay. It's a very hard thing for us to train our volunteers to do, but it's a big part of what they have to learn how to do, because it's very common that kids do that.
A lot of times I hear other parents saying, well, I don't know how to bring it up. They don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to bring it up, or that's why we come to group, or that's why they've got therapy. So for parents who it's hard for them to bring it up, they don't know how to approach it with their children, what is a gentle way to begin a conversation, or for them to start that relationship with their kids, talking more about the grief?
Yeah. The hard thing is not just bringing it up, but how often or when. And if you have more than one child, one might like to hear about it and one might not like to hear them brought up. So to find the balance there is a challenge. But I'm sure you're doing all the same things that I would suggest, like, oh, you look just like your dad when you made that face. Just lighthearted things like that.
So not in a serious way.
No,
okay.
Lighthearted. Oh, that was your brother's favorite book when he was your age too. Stuff like that. Or when you go to watch them do their gymnastics meet. I wish your dad was here to see that. He'd be so proud of you. Or good thing Daddy's watching over you. He would be, I'm sure he's very proud of you right now. Actually, I wanted to mention in the study, I started telling you about some of those, but we got sidelined. That was one of the things that in this one research study that was very landmark, they found was, I just made a tangent there, but this was important. They said consistent limits, caregiver warmth, good modeling of grief, connection to a religious community of whatever kind, and belief in the spiritual presence. That came up as a strong one. And, so a lot of the families, like the kids will report, I saw a sign, it was a butterfly, or whatever the sign is that they believe. So if your family has a belief in some kind of a spiritual connection.
The signs have been a big thing
Have
for us.
they?
I think they've really, it's been a lot really supportive for me, myself, but the girls, it's become also something that we have as a family that has bonded us in a different way.
What's your sign?
We have so many. But some of the big ones for Rylan are pink trees. Pink trees. So we learned after he died.
That's our time of year.
Yeah, we learned after he died that he liked pink trees. So that's a big one. I think rainbows and butterflies are a pretty common one for most families. And then we have a bunch of little ones that we see along the way, but they keep us connected, and
that's really
help
important.
The girls, and
yeah,
I think it helps them understand that even though he's physically not here, that he continues to be a presence in their life.
Yeah, though that what came up in that study. Tattoos for millennials, that's become another one.
Yep, I got a bunch.
You got them.
Yeah.
They call those, first they start out with the term keepsake.
Okay.
So a keepsake is like, first you have their, like if your mom dies, like I have her bracelet on, and
yeah, I got Rylan's ashes put in this ring.
Oh, you did?
So yeah, I have
that's
that.
Beautiful. And then after a while, they first they're called linking objects.
Okay.
That directly connects you with the person, and then eventually they take less of a significance in the child's life. Then the term gets adjusted and it's referred to as a keepsake. So it might end up in the drawer in your jewelry box rather than wearing it all the time. Probably not Ryland's ashes. That'll always be with you. But for some people, like my favorite example when I teach this is Katie Couric when her first husband died, the newscaster. She always wore her first husband Jay's wedding band on her chain around her neck. And I remember when she took it off, she stopped wearing it. And it eventually, I'm sure, ended up in her jewelry box. But that was her linking object to Jay. And then she started a pancreatic cancer foundation in his memory, which is also another thing that families can do is do things in memory or in honor of the person. Yeah. Like volunteering for a lot of our kids becomes a way of honoring their person who died.
We talked about families who have multiple grieving siblings and that they might not always grieve the same way.
Right.
How can parents help find a balance?
You have to look at them as individuals. Like just like they grieve differently, the things you do for them needs to be different. Like there was this one mom that I'm thinking of recently. She had 3 sons, and they definitely all did not want to be in the program. And first she was like forcing them all to come. And they were showing us by their behavior, the ones who didn't want to be there, that they wanted to get kicked out, and only one of them was really participating the way you need to be in a group. It has to be good for the other kids too. So parents need to listen to their kids and look at them as individuals, and some might need one-on-one support versus group support, but they do need to do something. Okay. I do want to make that point that...
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, if there's a kid who really doesn't want to go to something and then the parent really thinks they need it, how do you do that?
They do need it. They do need something. They should not have a choice to do nothing.
Okay.
I'm a firm believer in that after all my years in the field. If the child says, I don't want to go to some dumb grief group, the kids are all going to be so weird, because that's what they think if they don't come. Then say, okay, then you'll need to go to therapy. So it's an either or. It's not a nothing. That to me should be a non-negotiable.
Okay.
But if they're refusing to do the one that the parent is offering first, then they should be given the other one.
What is something that kids have told you over the years? Like, I wish my mom and dad would do this. I wish this would happen.
I think one of the biggest problems is when they're not told the truth.
Okay.
And then when they find out the truth about what really happened, that just causes all kinds of problems. And it can be avoided so easily. And I'm talking about if the person ends their own life, if it was death due to a homicide, an overdose, the kids can handle the truth. So, and I'm talking about 4-year-olds,
Okay.
3-year-olds. There are ways to tell on the website for our house, ourhouse-grief.org. I wrote a handout for each of those on how to explain those kinds of deaths for kids that is probably still on the website.
Yeah, I think it's scary for parents, and I think based on what you've said and the research that's been done, it's more important
to tell the
truth.
It's always more important to be truthful because they are always going to find out the truth. They are.
Have you come across that a lot, like with kids who don't know the truth until later?
Well, some parents won't bring them to us because they won't tell the kids the truth.
Oh, that you said that. You said that they have to know the truth in order to come.
They have to. Yeah, so they just opt out of coming.
That's hard. How can extended families support grieving kids and parents?
Well, since all family members are not moving forward at the same pace, so let's say kids want to look at home movies. Do those happen still? Do people have
We have them on their phone.
On the phones,
I think people have stuff on their phone,
right?
yeah.
Or you can watch it on your screen. So the kids would like to be given that opportunity, let's say, in a family, but one of their caregivers is too sad to do that. They could do that when they go over to their grandma's house or aunties and uncles. Hopefully they have one of those in the same city. They are great sources of information about what their person who died was like if they were an adult when they were young. They can tell them stories, they can show them photo albums, things like that. Relieving the caregivers, giving them nights off, taking the kids to do fun things so that the adult can have some alone time is really important. I would say those are probably the most important things.
Okay. And I think something that's happened in our family and seems to be common in other families too is that a lot of people leave. And like that's happened to us. So all of
Tell me what you mean, Ishani.
I think a lot of our extended friends that were in our life and family members have left, stopped talking to us, drift away. So there was a lot of support in the first few weeks after he died, and then it all kind of ended and didn't seem like people really knew how to deal with it. So their response is to not talk to us, or
disappointing.
or to go away. And a lot of times the girls say, well, what did we do? They think it's their fault, or they think they did something, or they ask like, oh, all these people were around when he was alive, and why are they gone now? So it's like all of this support.
They think they did something wrong.
They think they did something wrong, and it's all this support and love. And Ram and I are exhausted because it's really all on us at this point because we don't have those extended people to just kind of be like, we need a break sometimes from all of this.
Of course you do.
And not a break from our children, but just someone else that
grown-up time and alone time.
Just someone else that could come in and, tell a story or take them somewhere for an hour to be with, just to do something other than being with us. So I think that part is hard. So what can we do? I feel guilty that they don't have other people. So that's why like this community at our house and the support groups and other grieving families have become really important for us.
That's a very common thing. I was doing calls with grievers for New York today, and I mean, we hear that all the time, that people's, their friends really let them down and drift away so soon after the funeral, let alone 2 years later. And people are away from where their family of origin are too.
Are there any stories or moments from your 35 years working in grief that stand out to you or that you still maybe think about?
I have so many stories. One that really stands out, like some of my favorite stories are kids who went through the program and then became teen leaders, which are volunteer. They're like counselors in training, only they're volunteer group leaders, helpers in group. And then they go to college. And when they come back from college, they become regular group leaders or camp volunteers. But there was one boy in particular. He had 3 siblings. They were all very different. Like I said, I think one maybe had a disability and couldn't come to us. One was with us for a short period of time and left for college. And then this other one was with us maybe for 3 years. And I lost track of them after a while. His mom had died from, I think, breast cancer. And so many years later, I like to read the obituaries and the wedding pages in the New York Times. So I'm reading the New York Times and I see this boy's name, getting it, he has gotten married. And I'm like, it can't be him, but I read it. And he did what he had wanted to do. He became an oncologist.
Oh my gosh.
He was getting married and he had become an oncologist and was back here in LA, which was cool, even though that he was in the New York Times. But he had always said he wanted to find a cure for cancer because that's what his mom had died from.
Yeah.
And he was the most resilient, I would say, of the children in that family. But that just made me feel so good that, because a lot of the kids say that, I want to do this or that, follow in their footsteps or fight this, the disease that. But here was one of our alumni who actually did it. So that was so sweet to see.
It's very cool to see kids who want to find purpose in this. And I think that that's something that I guess gives me a little bit, I don't know if hope is the right word or what it is, but it gives me happy feelings when I see that or when they talk about wanting to do something in honor of their person or because of their person. I think that can be a really heartwarming thing to see.
Yeah. And this story, too, for the New York branch of our house, which is what I'm working on right now, is helping establish that branch. 2 women were friends in college, and both their husbands died of glioblastoma. One came to us here with her children, and their kids went through our program. Both of the children became teen leaders and stayed with us till they left for college, both those kids. But her girlfriend was in New York, and she didn't have a place to go when her husband died. And 10 years later, she was finally had enough. New York didn't have any in-person groups. And she approached us here in LA and said, I'd like to open a branch of our house in New York.
Cool.
And yeah, that was how we got started in New York.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I find a lot of people that are envious of what we have here in Los Angeles and this support. So a lot of people are, because I met people from all over the place and they're saying, oh, I wish I had that. I wish I had this grief group. And I think that's part of how this podcast started, was that we all needed somewhere to go to talk about things or feel some kind of connection to things.
We have a couple of places that we know of that have listings by zip code, so people can find places to get grief support anywhere in the country based on zip code. But I also I think I've seen a lot less taboo around the topic of grief than when I first came into the field. I love the podcasts. There's so many communities like yours, for people that are isolated. That's very, very hopeful that people don't have to be isolated. If they have a smartphone, they can find a podcast.
After 35 years, what still gives you hope? What still keeps you going in this field?
I mean, to me, honestly, it's just having a conversation with the griever, just being able to listen and be there for them because it's my calling. To me, it's very sacred to sit with people, like just to be at camp. I mean, it's tiring for me now after I've done like 25 at least Camp Errands, and it's a little tiring. But I loved being in your daughter's cabin and hearing them, what they're still struggling with, and all those little girls. And it's an honor. And so for me, it's an honor and a privilege. And I'm hopeful that there are a lot of people drawn to the work, providing that opportunity for grievers, a lot more than there used to be.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Sure.
This is important work, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm just so happy to see you smiling.
Oh, thanks.
And your girls are great. We didn't talk about resiliency. My team here in LA, for a little while, we were like, our skin was crawling because that word resiliency was being used too much, but there is a quality in some people that they are more adaptable. I'd like to use the word adaptable.
Versus using the word resilience.
Just because it's overused and, some people...
Yeah, we do hear that a lot. Children are resilient. They're going to get through it.
Yeah, they need certain conditions to be in place. They may appear to be doing well on the outside, but...
I hear
I
that.
wanted to give you some statistics
Oh,
because
yes.
you wanted that,
Yes,
and
I
I
love
haven't done
statistics.
that. Yeah, there's an organization called Judy's House in Denver.
Okay.
And they're a research institute. And
Okay.
every year they put out, it's called the Childhood Bereavement Estimation Model.
Okay.
They come up with, for every state and nationally, how many kids have experienced the death of a parent or sibling by age 18. And I just saw the new number, and every year it goes up. So now we're up nationally to 1 in 11.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't remember what it was when I started, but last year it was 1 in 12 nationally. And it just keeps going up. And we're post-pandemic now. We look for what it is that is driving that number up. But if people want to look at that, they can go look up on the Judy's House website. That's children under age 18 who've had a parent or sibling who died. Okay. In California, it's not quite as high as nationally, fortunately, but our numbers have been getting worse also.
I mean, what that tells us is that there's a lot of grieving kids out there.
There's a lot of grieving kids out there.
Going through significant loss because it's either parent or sibling.
That's parent or sibling.
Wow.
The death, the other statistic, people always say, well, what's the hardest death to grieve? That's another, one of those sort of myths. What would you think it would be?
For a child? I don't know.
Do you want to guess?
So if it's like loss of parent, loss of sibling, or...
Cause.
Oh, cause of death.
Yeah.
Illness? Or illness?
Illness and suicide. So, and the things for each of those, so that's higher than overdose and homicide.
So that's the hardest cause of death.
Those two deaths. And what they looked at were how the kids adjusted to life without the person who died. Did they develop mental health problems in addition to grief? Okay. So, and I'll give you the statistics of how many kids do.
Okay.
But the thing with illness, and you were right, Ishani, is that just like kids who are growing up in Gaza, they have been exposed to 2.5 years of trauma, repeated exposure to traumatic images. So a child who grew up, and I know kids like this, whose most of their life, their father was fighting cancer or had ALS. So they saw this, them getting worse and worse, and the hospital equipment and the this and the that, that took a toll on them. So very often, those kids didn't even want to come to group because they did not want to talk about it. When that death was over, they did not want to talk about that person who died.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to forget about it, and they wanted to go back and they wanted to go back to being just like a normal kid, but of course they couldn't. They were just suppressing all of their feelings about it at the time. And that's not true for all kids who have deaths due to long-term illness. A lot of them do go into programming. But so that, and then with suicide, the issue there is that not always, but in most cases, the person who ends their own life has had a very hard time adjusting to things going on in their life, and the child has been exposed to those same things, but didn't necessarily have the coping skills for it. So maybe it was mental illness, maybe it was also substance misuse, poverty, and everything that goes with that. So by the time the death has occurred, the child is already like over the limit of what a child can adapt to without experiencing their own trauma reactions like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or depression or anxiety. Okay.
Those are all different things that we go through in grief, which I assume children go through too. So like depression, PTSD, grief.
Not all kids.
Trauma. Okay.
Oh no. So I'll get to that.
Okay.
So if a child has a harder time adapting to their life without the person who died and does develop a mental health problem like depression, anxiety disorder, not just anxious, but disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder, in addition to grief. So we've got the mental illness over here, and we have grief over here.
Okay.
Then our programs, we've been talking about peer-based grief support, like Our House or Camp Erin, may not be enough for them. Those kids over here, they might need, or they most likely need, clinical intervention. So that means from, therapist over here or other therapists doing trauma-focused work with kids to help them with those symptoms, because the way they're reacting to that is interfering with their day-to-day functioning. Yeah. Right? So how many kids fall into that category versus this category? It depends on which researcher you talk to.
Okay.
So I can answer your question like in binary terms. So the range for healthy adaptation to life without the person who died is as high as 90%, anywhere between, let's say, 75 to 90%, which is really good, right? And especially if those conditions are being met in their environment that I've told you about.
Like they've received the interventions.
The good parenting, number one, and then the social supports that we talked about, at school, maybe peer support, and the other things that we talked about. Okay. On the other hand, the ones who develop what is now referred to as prolonged grief disorder, which actually is considered a mental health problem, which is really, we don't like to call it a mental health problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought about that.
I think it's horrible.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, but let's not call it that. Let's say maybe they have PTSD. Maybe they have real depression or real anxiety disorder. Is anywhere from, depending on which researcher, 5 to 25%. So it's like the opposite of the resilient or adaptable kids' reaction.
I hate that prolonged grief disorder.
Me too.
Because I don't think grief is a disorder, but
It's not.
I don't know if they were trying to do something good with that.
It was because the drug industry was behind it.
I see.
Medication. So if you have a diagnosis, you can get medication for. So the drug industry was pushing for a diagnosis code
Around grief.
For more than 20 years.
Wow.
And the only reason why that people like it is that some insurance companies will pay for your therapy so for kids, you can't even diagnose a child with that unless it's been 6 months since the death. But listen to this. Do you know what the main criteria is?
What?
Yearning for the deceased.
I mean, we're all doing that.
Exactly.
All grieving people have a disorder then.
So imagine this. At 7 months after Rylan dies, I'm talking to Selah or Neva, and I'm saying, tell me about your grief, and they say, well, I really miss my brother, and I really wish I could be with him. Well, how often do you feel like that? All the time. That's criteria 1.
Yeah.
I mean, how silly is that? It's horrible.
It is.
So we basically shake our fingers and say, do not diagnose kids. So if you're not getting private therapy paid for, people shouldn't be diagnosing. And if you have to go to a counseling center because you can't afford private therapy, which the majority of Americans do have to go to a counseling center, they have to diagnose you. But there are some lesser diagnoses. Adjustment disorder is not as severe. I don't even know if you could use that with kids, actually. So I might be wrong about that, but I agree with you. I mean, we never promote the use of that diagnosis. For adults, it's after 12 months, and you can diagnose a month after the first year.
Okay.
Which is still, a grieving mother.
I'm pretty sure every single grieving mother can
meets
be
the
diagnosed
criteria.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones are, severe impairment at work. Some of them do sound more, if you look it up, sound a little more severe. But the central features, that's what they call them, central features, the yearning for, I can't think of off the top of my head what the other 3. There's like 4 central features and then some other ones.
Okay.
They're like no-brainers.
Before we end today, what are some good resources that you could recommend for our families?
The organization that started Camp Erin, it's called the Eluna Foundation.
ELUNA?
ELUNA.
Okay.
They have a resource center, which has resources for families and for educators. It's like a library online of resources, so that's really a good resource. The National Alliance for Children's Grief, their website is childrengrieve.org. They have webinars that anybody can sign up for. They have a lot of resources on their website, so that's a really good place to look at.
Okay.
And Our House has a lot of good resources, ourhouse-grief.org. We have a recommended reading list, both for books for children and for adults, a separate one. A lot of handouts. We have books that we sell that people who've worked at our house have authored, and the journals and memory books that people can get to do with their children too, very reasonably priced.
And do you have any closing remarks before we go today?
I want to offer hope to your listeners that we don't just talk about surviving with kids, that they do thrive. That I want to offer hope to your listeners. Your kids can thrive. They're not going to just survive. They are still going to thrive. And I see it all the time. They write their essays for college, and they write about how they've had a significant death in their life on their college essays. And they go to Ivy League schools, and they study, and then they come back, and they just do great. And they all have that capacity to continue healing as long as they're getting that support that they need.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for the time and for sharing all that info. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Sad Moms. Help us spread awareness about grief and grow our community by writing an Apple review, rating us on Spotify, subscribing on YouTube, and sharing with as many people as you can. Until next time, have a day.